Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
The DeLorean car was made famous thanks to the Back to the Future movies, but the real company that made DeLoreans went bankrupt within just a couple of years of starting. So what happened? The crazy story of DeLorean involves a war, FBI agents, and $1 million drug deal gone wrong. It's a business story with a meteoric rise to the top and a disastrous fall to the bottom, with lots of wealth, fame, and drama along the way. Plus a very eccentric CEO. But in true DeLorean style, to make sense of all of this, we need to travel back in time. Our story starts in the 1920s in Detroit, Michigan, the mecca of America's auto industry and home of the big three. Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler all proudly made their vehicles in this city that once employed 1 in every 5 people living in Michigan. It was also here that an automotive genius, John DeLorean, was born. His father, a Romanian immigrant, worked as a union organizer for the Ford Motor Company, but his poor English skills and lack of education restricted him from gaining a higher position in the business. Whereas from a young age, John DeLorean showed great interest in technology and excelled at his studies. He got accepted into the Lawrence Institute of Technology, where he turned his attention to industrial engineering. His future looked bright, but his personal life was getting dark. During this time, John's parents divorced, and his father would become a reclusive drug addict. John was then drafted to fight in World War II and served 3 years in the army. After all this, John realized that although he wanted to pursue engineering, he needed to help his family out, since they were in very poor living conditions. Thus, John got a job selling life insurance. It wasn't something he particularly enjoyed, but he did gain a lot of communication skills here that helped him become a great salesman. John grew bored in the job though, and eventually an opportunity came up for a postgraduate program run by the Chrysler Institute for Automotive Engineers. After graduating from the program, John was able to join the engineering team of Chrysler, which he then leveraged into getting an even better job at General Motors, initially working in their Pontiac division. John worked hard, and thanks to the mentors he had at the company, he was soon able to work up to the position of chief engineer for Pontiac. However, John loved European sports cars, especially those made by Enzo Ferrari. So when he was put in charge of Pontiac, DeLorean decided that America should have their own version of a powerful sports car, and he led the development of the Pontiac GTO. This was a risk, as the heads of General Motors weren't impressed by the idea and didn't see the point, since they already had powerful fast cars like the Camaro and Corvette. But John backed himself, and it paid off. The public loved it, and John got promoted to the head of the Pontiac division, making him the youngest division head at GM at only 40 years old. John continued making improvements to the GTO, which helped start America's muscle car era. However, John already had his sights set on his next challenge. He wanted to make a powerful luxury car. The problem was, Pontiac didn't have the funds for it. So John sweet-talked his boss to transfer some funds from another division over to the Pontiac team. And before long, John had led the development of the Pontiac 1969 Grand Prix car. Once again, John had taken a risk on a car that many executives didn't think was a good idea, but once again, sales numbers were great, and John had helped boost the brand's reputation. John DeLorean quickly became a household name as he started showing up in magazines, televised interviews, and big car events. His image was helped further as he was almost the complete opposite of the other Detroit automotive heads. Whilst they were all elderly men who dressed in black suits with ties, John DeLorean was younger, had long brushed hair, and wore sneakers and open button shirts. He did things differently and was very charismatic, and thus he started to develop an image as a bit of a maverick. He was also seen at big celebrity parties and often dated famous actresses and models. In fact, the first time he ever saw his third wife was when he saw her on the cover of a magazine. GM knew they had a rock star on their hands, and if he could become the face of their development team, then it would help boost sales even further. So GM once again promoted John DeLorean and made him the head of their most prized division, Chevrolet. Now, GM was the largest car company in the world at the time, so John was of course thrilled to be rising up the ranks so quickly. However, this promotion couldn't have come at a worse moment. Chevrolet was going through a very rough patch as they were completely behind schedule with their production and facing massive delays, which was allowing competitors to dominate instead. However, just like he'd done in the Pontiac division, John managed to turn things around for Chevrolet, as he managed to speed up production by simplifying the car designs, as well as lowering assembly costs and improving Chevrolet's reputation. In truth, John's own personal public image had helped as well, as his cool persona continued to grow, because John was one of the first corporate leaders of the time to be publicly living such an exciting life. Seeing how well John was boosting car sales, GM then decided to use his fame to sell their new compact family sedan, the Vega. John went back to his insurance salesman tactics and began touting the Vega as the highest quality product Chevrolet has ever made, and that it could beat any European car in handling and acceleration. Both statements proved to be untrue, as the Vega was plagued with engineering, reliability, and safety problems. But despite the crazy statements, Americans bought the Vega largely because John told them to, and over 270,000 were sold. Before long, John was promoted to vice president of General Motors, and many thought he would eventually become the president of the whole company. But this kind of scared GM's executives. John's eccentricity and unusual style was very unpredictable. He didn't always do what he was supposed to, and some executives felt his seemingly rock and roll lifestyle didn't give the company the kind of stability and organization like GM needed. And thus, they began fighting with John over his ideas for the future of GM. You see, John didn't like having to sell the Vega and wanted to go back to making cars that excited him. He wanted to compete against Ferrari GTOs instead of competing against Volkswagen Beetles. Now, what happened next is still debated. Some say that after John gave a speech highlighting the company's flaws and publicly outing some executives, GM lost patience with him and forced him out of the company. Others say John just felt like GM was too corporate and holding him back, and that he was so fed up with having to please the conservative executives that he quit. Whatever the truth was, John was now out of the company and ready to take on the biggest bet of his career. But before we get to the next chapter, I want to tell you about our video sponsor, Teach Hanley. Let's be honest guys, most of us, myself included, don't really know what we're doing when it comes to skincare. This is where Teach Hanley comes in. They make it easy to achieve clear and healthy skin with their uncomplicated skincare system. If you're new to skincare, I recommend you start with their Level 1 system that comes with a daily face wash, an exfoliating scrub, an AM moisturizer with SPF 20, and a PM moisturizer. My favorite part about Teach Hanley is that every box comes with an instruction card that tells you exactly what to do. I've been using their system and I genuinely have noticed a positive difference in the way my skin looks and feels. And don't just take my word for it. They have over 5,000 5-star reviews on their websites. And because Teach Hanley is sponsoring today's video, they're offering you a great deal. Just click the first link in the description and you'll get 30% off your first box, plus a free gift. Seriously, that's an amazing deal. So click the link below and get started today. For half a century, America didn't really have any new car manufacturers because to compete with the big three was crazy. But John DeLorean perhaps was a little crazy, and certainly extremely ambitious. So John made the risky decision to start his own car company. With his star power and vast automotive industry connections, in 1973, John created the DeLorean Motor Company, or DMC as it was known. And John wanted the first DMC car to be a sports car built from the ground up. Something that could show the world what he would have accomplished at GM if it wasn't for other executives interfering and restricting him. Something that represented the future. Something that would change the world. To do this, John recruited Lotus founder Colin Chapman to design the chassis, and DeLorean designed the body along with Giorgetto Giugiaro, who designed cars for Ferrari and Alfa Romeo. John also poached some engineers from GM. Together, they came up with a futuristic looking sports car that would come with gull-wing doors, a rear engine, and be made with stainless steel. At the time, many European sports cars were vulnerable to rust since they used thin metals to keep the weight of the car light. But stainless steel doesn't rust as easily, so it not only gave the car a shiny, futuristic look, it also helped protect the car against bad weather. After assembling the right team and using his automotive contacts to get the different parts he needed, such as an engine that could offer his car the speed and power he wanted, the DMC DeLorean was born as a concept car, which John called the DMC-12. The problem was, although it was striking to look at, it was still only a concept, and actual production of the car seemed almost impossible, especially with the budget DeLorean had. But John was a smart salesman, and managed to use his network he'd built up to raise money by selling investors on his vision for the company. However, to build a manufacturing plant required even more money than he could raise from individual investors, and so he really needed the support of a government. But the USA, Germany, Italy, and Japan, who were all automotive giants, didn't seem to be interested in supporting DeLorean's new company, as they didn't think it would be able to compete with its bigger rivals. So, John looked at countries that were going through a rough time and desperately needed employment, as perhaps they would give him government grants in return for creating jobs. And there was just one country that was willing to give DeLorean the money needed to open a car factory, and that was Northern Ireland. The only problem was that meant he'd have to build his business in a war zone. From the late 1960s to the late 1990s, Ireland had gone through a violent conflict which became known as the Troubles. Now, this period is too nuanced to properly explain in just a few seconds, but the simplified version is that the Catholics in the country were being discriminated against and denied civil rights, which led to them protesting and a stronger nationalist sentiment starting to grow. The country became very divided between the Protestants, who mostly wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom, and the Catholics, who didn't. The UK then sent the military to try and keep the peace in Northern Ireland, but this only made matters worse as it caused many nationalists to feel like they were under attack from Great Britain, leading to the revival of organisations like the Irish Republic Army, or IRA, who viewed the conflict as a guerrilla war for national independence. Both sides formed their own paramilitaries and lots of fighting broke out, and thus you had this situation that was kind of like a civil war, as the country was so divided and political and religious tensions were running very high. As a result, Northern Ireland quickly became a dangerous and violent place. There was constant riots, street violence, and even bombings and assassinations became normal. Thousands of lives were lost in this brutal conflict spanning several decades. Unsurprisingly, not many businesses were looking to invest in the country with all this going on, and thus unemployment in Northern Ireland was very high. Enter John DeLorean with his plan to create a new car company that could create lots of jobs and help the economy. Since the UK government was desperate to try and create some peace between the Protestant and Catholics and help tackle rising unemployment, they decided to give grants to John DeLorean to help him build a car factory in Northern Ireland in the city of Belfast. John DeLorean later commented that literally no other country would give him any funding, as they didn't think this company would survive. But since no new companies really wanted to go to Northern Ireland at the time with all the riots and fighting going on, Northern Ireland was as desperate for jobs as John was desperate for funding. So the deal worked for both sides. And despite all the violence and hate going on outside, the DeLorean factory became a peaceful common ground between the Catholic and Protestant workers. Whilst they fought each other on the streets, inside the factory they worked side by side. And together, the Irish workers were able to get the first DeLorean off the line in 1981. Finally, John DeLorean proved to the world that it was possible to start up a car company from scratch and deliver a car that looked like it came from another world. Unfortunately, the story of DeLorean is not a success story. Although creating this new car was a great triumph for DeLorean, it didn't mean people were rushing to buy it for several good reasons. For starters, the DMC-12 was an American car with an Italian design, a mostly French engine, and was built in a factory where none of the workers had any previous car-making experience. None of those things led to reliability, so the DeLorean was sold full of problems. Another thing was the price tag. The DMC DeLorean sold for around $25,000, which is more like $70,000 in today's money. For context, at the same time, you could buy a Corvette for almost half the price. Whilst John had wanted to make an affordable car, costs had spiraled out of control. And as well as being pricey, the car got a bad reputation because the first batch they produced had some engineering and performance issues. The DeLorean's engine was too weak to power the heavy car, and so the sports car was as slow as a family sedan. Plus, in 1981, the economy tanked and nobody was willing to spend an exuberant amount of money on a sports car anyway. Not only did the economy damage the car industry, it also allowed for Japanese companies to take over the market with cheaper, more reliable alternatives. And the recession and bad exchange rates also hurt DeLorean even further. As a result, just a year after the first DMC DeLorean rolled out of the factory line, the DeLorean Motor Company was on the verge of bankruptcy. But still, John was sure that his car would be a hit, it just needed more time and a few adjustments. But for that, DeLorean needed even more money. And unfortunately for John, it was around this time that Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and she wanted to significantly reduce government spending. She felt her predecessors had given DeLorean too much money already, so she immediately ceased all government funding of the factory in Northern Ireland and refused to give John any more money to bail the company out. Desperate for money and now facing a closure of his one and only manufacturing plant, John needed to raise the money himself and looked for any deal he could get. John truly cared about his company and wasn't just going to let it die, so he reportedly traveled all over the world meeting investors. But his salesman charm seemed to have run out, as he couldn't convince people DeLorean was a good bet anymore. Still, John DeLorean vowed to his team that he would find a way to get the money. But when he said that, nobody could have predicted what he'd do next. A former neighbour of John's, knowing that he needed money fast, contacted him and told him of a deal that could get him millions of dollars very quickly. This was exactly what John needed. The only problem was that the deal involved buying and selling a very large shipment of cocaine. Feeling like he had no other way to make money to save his company, John agreed to this drug smuggling deal, and a meeting was set in a hotel in Los Angeles near LAX airport. John was told that this deal would make him millions of dollars in total, which he would then use to revive his car company, and thus John agreed to the scheme. However, this former neighbor of John's was actually setting him up and was secretly working as an FBI informant to try and reduce a prison sentence he'd received. And so the whole thing was a sting operation by the FBI, and just as they were toasting to the agreement, FBI agents suddenly burst into the room and John was arrested and charged with conspiracy to obtain and distribute $24 million worth of cocaine. And because the whole thing was a planned setup, they had video evidence of John agreeing to this very illegal deal. Quite suddenly, John realized that he'd gone from a popular celebrity at the peak of his career to facing serious jail time. In 1984, after 22 weeks of court proceedings, a surprising verdict was reached. John DeLorean would not be heading to jail, as during his trial, John was able to prove he was a victim of entrapment. Despite John agreeing to the deal, the jury saw the whole thing as a setup of a desperate man who'd been trying to save his car company. Now, many believe that the reason the US government had tried to set up John DeLorean was because it would have been a great publicity move for Reagan's war on drugs to prosecute someone who, at the time, was a big-name celebrity. The problem was the FBI informant had told the FBI that John had suggested the drug deal, when in reality, that was not the case at all. It was very much a setup. And thus, John DeLorean was found not guilty. Whilst this was clearly very fortunate for John, the damage had been done. John DeLorean and his shiny sports car were on the cover of every newspaper and magazine in the country over the scandal. His name became synonymous with sleazy drug deals. John DeLorean's reputation, just as his father's, had been destroyed by drugs. Just in a different way. John knew his legacy had been tarnished forever. When a reporter asked him if he would ever return to the car industry, John said, "I don't know, would you buy a used car from me?" However, they do say any press is good press, and despite John feeling like his car career was over, all the publicity his trial got meant many people heard about the DeLorean car because of it. And they started to see it as a cool car with a cool story because of the scandal John had been involved in. People saw the car next to John's face in newspapers and magazines so much, they started to like the car more than they had initially believed. Thus, for a short time, DMC sold more DeLoreans than ever before. But it wasn't enough to keep the factory in Belfast open, so they were forced to shut it down in 1982. Over 1,000 workers were laid off, and in total, only 9,000 DeLoreans were ever actually produced. The Irish workers protested over the plant's closure for months, but their frustrations never amounted to anything. The DeLorean company was dead. It wasn't until 1985, a whole 3 years after the DeLorean Motor Company fell apart, that the DMC DeLorean became a cultural icon when it became the time machine in the beloved movie Back to the Future. In one of the original drafts for the script of the movie, Marty McFly travelled back in time in a lead-lined refrigerator. It felt too silly though, so the movie's director, Robert Zemeckis, suggested the time machine be a car instead. But which car? Well, like many others, the director had seen the DMC DeLorean plastered on every magazine and newspaper because of John's drug scandal, and he'd been struck by the car's futuristic look and stainless steel finish. And thus, the DMC DeLorean was chosen to be the film's iconic time machine. This caused hysteria over the car, and almost every fan of the movie dreamt of having their own DMC DeLorean. And of course, as the movie's popularity grew and it became a whole trilogy, demand for DeLorean cars only grew further. Unfortunately, by the time the movie came out, there were no DeLoreans being sold anywhere. The factory had shut down, and by the time young fans of the movie could afford it, the DeLorean was an antique of yesteryear, a collector's item that is still being sought after to this day. In fact, there are even DeLorean fan clubs now, and they've hosted events where DeLorean owners all went on a pilgrimage to John DeLorean's old house. Many owners have kitted out their cars too, such as adding their own look-alike flux capacitor, just like the movie. So, whilst John's company didn't survive, this trilogy of films helped immortalize DeLorean's beloved car in a way he could never even dreamed of. But, strangely, this is not quite the end of the DeLorean story. Even though the DeLorean Motor Company was shut down, the DMC DeLorean was still being fought over by collectors and movie fans. Of course, these old and faulty cars often needed repairs, and not many DMC parts were available. Fortunately, after the Belfast DMC plant was closed down, a liquidation company bought all the DMC parts left behind and put them in a storage facility. These parts were then used over the years by Stephen Wine, a mechanic out of Texas who specialized in DeLoreans. And in 1997, Wine decided to buy the entire stock of DeLorean parts to distribute and sell himself to fans of the car. But he didn't only buy the car parts, he also bought all the documents that were left behind at the Belfast plant. This included blueprints for how to make an original DMC DeLorean. With all of this information at his disposal, Wine decided that he would help build new DeLoreans out of his shop. In 2015, Congress passed the FAST Act that allowed for the low-volume manufacture of replica cars as long as the cars met modern safety and production standards. Since then, excitement has built over fans wanting to buy a new DMC-12 DeLorean using mostly original parts. Production was stalled for years though, over legal problems involving the National Highway Safety Administration, as well as problems over the rights to the name DeLorean Motor Company. But although those legal problems still persist, Wine has been able to finally acquire the rights to the DMC name and has announced that the first car by the new DeLorean Motor Company will be produced shortly. They soon plan on releasing the DeLorean Alpha 5 EV, a luxury electric sports car. Finally, the DeLorean Motor Company has the prospects of becoming the car brand of the future, just like John always wanted. The tragedy is though, John DeLorean never got to see his beloved car become so popular, or that his company would be revived, as he passed away in 2005. He died alone in a small one-bedroom apartment, unaware of the legacy his cars would have. But, quick question for you. Did you know that just like John DeLorean, the man who built Lamborghini was also inspired by Ferrari? Except there's one key difference. The whole reason Lamborghini was created was to get revenge on Ferrari. Yep, Lamborghini was built out of spite by a tractor farmer and former prisoner of war. It's a wild story, and you can watch it right now by clicking the thumbnail on screen. I'll see you there. Cheers.